Yes, thank you very much, Lena, for this very generous introduction. I appreciate your kindness. Ladies and gentlemen, Rector, I'm very pleased to be able to be here this morning and to be able to talk to you about this favorite subject of mine, sustainability. I know I'm preaching to the choir here at SLU, given your motto, but I still decided to do it because I think it's so important, and maybe I can contribute a few thoughts that, to the things you're already thinking about. So I will not at length explain what sustainability is, because I assume here you know a lot about that, but I will introduce this concept of wicked problems that Lena has already mentioned that I think will help us to think about sustainability. Then I will highlight some research contributions, and then I will talk how do we change towards more sustainability and end with some conclusions. So you all have seen the United Nations Sustainability Goals, and I'm using this slide, first of all, to remind you that we're not only talking about environmental issues and natural resources, but we're also talking about people, about poverty, about health, and we're also talking about economics. And if you go all the way down here, we're talking about peace and justice. Louise has mentioned some of those justice issues, and about partnership for these goals. And I also want to use these UN goals to highlight some of the research contributions later. So, what's going on in the agri-food chain? As an economist, I'm coming to you with this flyover perspective, the whole chain. And I looked throughout the chain, what are people there doing for sustainability? What are some systems to introduce and measure sustainability in those agri-food chains? And it starts at the input industry, big firms like BASF, who have their own interests, but they also develop measurement systems that they want to introduce throughout the chain. Then in the agricultural and horticultural production, for example, the Stewardship Index for Specialty Crops, which was a system that has been developed in the United States, and I have been involved in its development. And then towards the end of the chain, the retail industry, which is such a pivotal actor in the whole chain, because the retailers influence what happens in the beginning of the chain, in the production, and at the end of the chain at the consumer side. And most initiatives we see actually in retailing. So we see individual companies building their own systems, like, for example, supplier codes of conduct. So it's about our suppliers, not so much about us. And store brands, like, for example, Reves Pro Planet, it's a German company that want to make a point in working on hotspots in the agricultural value chain. But the most important systems are multi-stakeholder initiatives, and there are many of those. These include BTI and many others, and the most widespread is the Global Gap currently, that is imposing their system in over 100 countries worldwide on everyone basically who wants to sell into European retailers, because you have to go through Global Gap certification. We as consumers don't know it because it's not a brand, but they all have to go through the same system and get these values imposed on them. So what I found when I was looking at all these systems from the beginning of the chain to the very end is that there's very little science and theory involved in that. It's more ad hoc. It's what the people who are participating in this development think is important, but it seems almost that purposefully science is kept out of that. So I thought, let me think about that some more. I bet we can contribute something to the development of sustainability measurement as scientists. So I looked into more theoretical approaches that I believe will help us both understand why sustainability is such a difficult problem, and also help find ways towards more sustainability. And I want to mention 3 of the many approaches there that can be useful. The first one is the wicked problem, and I will talk a bit more about that as we go along. And nowadays there are also super wicked problems, which means we are running out of times mostly. We don't have so much time to think about it anymore. We need to act. And then there's post-normal science, which was developed more recently than the super wicked problem. And the post-normal science I also use to further inspire the thinking about wicked problems. And then I want to revisit something that is called modeling through. And modeling through has already been developed in the 50s, and you will see that this strangely named concept has something to contribute to our thinking and working on sustainability. So, what is a wicked problem? I took this picture in Beijing of this edifice, which is called Bird's Nest, to show you both a wicked and a tame problem. So you can see the difference. What you see here is Bird's Nest. This is a wonderful edifice. The architecture of this is really fantastic. Many people had to come together to build this. This was very complicated. Many experts have worked on that from many different areas of craft and science. But that's not the wicked problem, that's the tame problem, because it's complicated and many people have to come together to do it, but you can separate it out into individual pieces, and then you can give each piece to an expert, and the result of that can be brought together again, and you get this wonderful, beautiful building. But this is not a black and white picture, as you can see by the red umbrella in the middle. This is a color picture, so why is it so grayish? That's the air pollution in Beijing. And those of you who have been to Beijing will know that it's a rampant problem. I myself, I can hardly breathe when I'm there. And the air pollution in Beijing is a wicked problem because, of course, the Chinese government has also tried to clean the air ahead of the Olympics. Now, this picture is taken after the Olympics, so you see that it was not so easy to do that, even if you have all the power to make all the changes fast that you want to see happen. So what makes a problem a wicked problem? A wicked problem cannot be tamed, and there is no one solution. Sometimes there are several ways to go forward, and all of these ways are promising, but there's no solution. And these wicked problems are also complex and controversial. What does that mean in detail? There are multiple layers of a problem, and it is intertwined with others. If you tweak something at one layer, thinking, okay, I'm going to turn this screw and I will improve everything, you will see that here and there and anywhere, there are consequences, and many of those consequences are unintended. We don't want that, but we cannot separate it out and put it back together again. It's complex, and the problem changes over time. So, and every attempt to do something about the problem leads to changes in the problem that then need to be recognized as we move further. There is no solution. There's only managing for better or for worse. So it's somehow unsatisfactory to work on wicked problems. But we still need to do it. Everyone is unique, so we cannot, if we have found a good way to go forward in one situation, we cannot transfer that to the next and just take it. We need to tailor it. And that's because it cannot be understood without its context. It cannot be insulated from the context. It's ill-defined and the causal paths are unclear. So our normal way of doing paradigmatic science is problematic here because we do not have these precise theories that you would need to do paradigmatic science. There are multiple actors and stakeholders involved, and Louise has trailblazed for me here, so I can build on her. And they have conflicting perspectives. They do not just differ with regard to what their value systems are, they also differ with regard to what they think the facts are. And they cannot easily be convinced of the same facts. And what is even worse is strategic participation. If things are not going their direction, they withdraw. And you're left alone, and the whole ideas that you had and bringing everybody together can be jeopardized because of that. And this is most frustrating to many of us who want to see change happening. There is no end, because there is no solution. So at some point we need to decide, okay, we have worked on this problem, we have gone further, but now we need to move on to the next problem, and we can come back to this one later, because we cannot at all times spend all our resources on a single problem, because there are so many problems that we have to deal with. So I want to next come to research, given that we are at a scientific meeting here. And I'm going to do some self-bashing. As Lena has said, I was very good at doing traditional economics work. And I find that for wicked problems, traditional economics methods are only of limited use. We often use secondary data. That means we didn't collect our own data, and we have not actually looked at the real-world events out there. We use modeling and simulation, and modeling and simulation require very precise data, that's also certain, but we don't have that, especially not in wicked problems. We have estimated data and we have uncertain data. So if we use those traditional methods, that leads to extending our results much beyond confidence method, and we are not contributing in the right direction. So what I'm suggesting here, and I have already started to suggest that a few years ago, is that we do more research that's grounded in the qualitative paradigm. That means we look more into live worlds, and Louise has also talked about that. And we do that through other methods. We do that through participant observation and observation. We do that through interviews and in-depth interviews, and through analyzing artifacts. And we do more qualitative work in economics, which seems like the quantitative science. But I really think that we as economists have a lot to contribute here. So I give you some examples of that, and I do that using the work of my team, because I hear from many young researchers and the next generation, for a career in science, and Louis has also talked about that, for a career in science, you need to do traditional work. You need to publish or perish, and you need to be successful in traditional work. So how can I do these complex problems where it is so much more difficult to get published? And I want to show you some examples from my team towards the contrary. But I will start with a different point that's also important to me. That is that to actually move towards more sustainability in agri-food systems, we need two types of actors, and those two types of actors are often ignored when we look at the agri-food system as a technical issue, because then we draw the system borders too narrowly. First of all, there's the research system. So the actor there is the researcher, and I'm especially want to challenge the next generation to become that actor. Because without the research that work on these complicated problems, and without giving them funding to do it and allowing them the time and the focus to do it, we will not have that, but we need it. We need to work on those really important problems. And the second actor is, one of the earlier speakers also talked about that, the entrepreneur and the farmer, because without farmers and the next generation of farmers, we will also not have an agri-food system to speak of in Europe in the time to come, because young people are hesitant to go there, because this profession is not well respected currently in many advanced societies. But we need those people, and we need them to work hard. So I've had some people in my team work on generational sustainability and succession processes, and what we can actually do to make young people continue the work of their priors. Next, I want to talk about other requirements that I see for a sustainable agri-food system. And the first one is the adaptation of production methods, and we've done some work on that from the economic perspective, especially on the increased risk that comes from climate change. But I want to talk about something less conventional that we also have done some work on. That's the reduction of waste. Food waste is an important topic. The resources we could save if we had fewer food waste is enormous. It's an enormous percentage that goes into waste. Sorry. So to make my next point, I need to tell you that a lot of the research on food waste notices that a lot of the waste shows up at the consumer end of things. So the consumer is responsible, right? No, not right. But we were also misled by that into looking into food movements first, what can consumers do to change the amount of waste that shows up in their trash can. But we then later found that the pivotal actor in this value chain is the retailer, because the retailer has a lot of influence backwards towards the production and forwards on the consumer. And so in retail, and other research in the UK and other countries have also found that you can do a lot when you look into retail and make changes there to reduce food waste. So avoiding it is, of course, the first priority, but then you can also reuse it. Reusing it means still using it for human consumption, but not at the place where it was initially intended. There's also recycling, but I don't want to talk about that. So reusing it in Germany and many other countries, that is often done in food banks, where it is shared with the poor that can then use this money for other purposes. Because there is, of course, poverty in European countries. And we have also looked into strategies for food banks to better serve the poor in this article on sector blending. I want to end this excursion towards research contributions and where more work needs to be done with a third group of contributions, and that's about new forms of production and new forms of consumption. And when I talk new forms of production, I think of, for example, inclusion of different types of workforce in the production. Those could be disadvantaged people, handicapped people. It could also be workforces that have not been allowed in the traditional system, like migrants, refugees, and so forth. But I'm also talking about solidarity agriculture, which is one of the development in Western developed countries now, where consumers want to become more like prosumers. They want to participate in the production process. And this is something we really need to look more into and learn more about it. But we should not forget that there are other countries, there's international exchange, and many countries are using their agricultural production as a source of development and for bettering their poor. So when we think, oh, we want to do everything regionally, we should not forget that there are people who depend on us buying some of the things they produce. And so one way to improve that is through social businesses, so that the creation and production and the processing is done in a way that helps disadvantaged people in other countries or in our own countries. But it also includes countries that we traditionally think of, developing countries like Bangladesh, and we have done this work on the ready-made garment industry in Bangladesh, which also has a lot of gender equality factors. However, we did not go there, but we worked with artifacts, things that have been produced by Bangladeshi and other people about what they do. And this is a really interesting analysis. Okay, so how do we use that to move towards sustainability? First of all, we need measurement, because we need to be able to tell, are we moving in the right direction? Because even so there's no solution, we can move in the right direction, or we can move in the wrong direction, as some countries are doing right now by just negating everything we have already accomplished and taking it for granted that temperatures will rise by 7 degrees at the end of the century. Do we want that? No, we don't want that. So we need to change. Now, the danger is when we think about measurement systems that we think it is a technical issue and we can delegate this to experts, but it is not. Measurement is not a technical issue. Measurement requires value judgments. And I want to give you an example of that. I took the UN goal of decent work. That's a sustainability goal that I want to talk about. And then we need criteria. How do we measure decent work? We can say, oh, people need to make at least a decent wage, minimum wage at least. There should be no child work and so on. So those are the criteria. This is the next layer. Then we need to break that down into an indicator system. So what are the indicators? No child work. An indicator could be people need to be at least 18 to work. Yes, works wonderfully. No, think again. Think about these localized value judgment. Not all countries have social nets like Germany or Sweden. Some countries don't. And what happens to children if they're not allowed to work at all? They will sit in the street and beg. They cannot get an education. So we need to think again, how can we change that? So we need to consider the context. We need to consider the system borders. So value judgments cannot be delegated to experts. Each and every one of us, every society has to be involved in those judgments. It's not expert knowledge that is just applied. So we cannot just let these retailers make up the systems for us. We need to get involved. How do we do that? For that is where modeling through comes in. Lindblom, already in the 50s, has developed a system about what to do, and he worked in public administration because there people are confronted with that all the time. We have imprecise theories, we have uncertain data. We as individuals lack the capacity to take in all that data and work through all this information. And there are national and individual egoisms that do not always lead us to do the right thing. No, we have all done the wrong thing one day or another. So then what can we do? It means that, as I explained prior, that value preference depends on context. So we need to compare only the real alternatives. And we need to take small steps, relying on past experiences that help us predict the future. But we need to take those small steps fast. The good thing about small steps is that we can change, we can adjust all the time. It's not like China where they go, we're going to do this, and we make it happen, and we never pause along the way. Here we can adjust all the time. So these decisions combine the choice among values and the choice among instruments for reaching those values. The mutual adjustments here are the important point. And it has often been overlooked when people look at Lindblom's work. Lindblom underlines the importance of democracy in this, because in democracies, there are people who advocate for each and every one of these different values. We do all have different values that we prioritize, and in democracies, we have a chance to actually do that and bring that into the decision-making. So Lindblom suggested that we need people with vastly different experiences and professional and personal values to be in these systems. That includes the research system, which is an important part of this. So that brings me to my conclusions. So sustainability, as I tried to point out to you, is a wicked problem. There is disagreement about what the facts are and what the priorities should be. There is no final solution, and we need to hash it out in political processes. So what I suggest here to you is that our priority must be to set up systems that are adaptable, that are flexible, so we can introduce change and innovation. Because if one thing is for sure, that's that there will be change. There's change in our societal priorities, there's change in the situations that are most urgent, and there, if we get the funding, there will be change in scientific knowledge. So it is very important that we move in the right directions and build trust vis-a-vis that complexity that we have in front of us, both in terms of content as well as in the process to get there. So I want to make an appeal to especially the next generation, but of course also the current, to work in that direction, even though it is so challenging and has professional risks. So how do we contribute to that? First of all, we contribute through research. As researchers, mostly, especially when working in the qualitative paradigm, we are specialists in pattern recognition. And to that, we have in the social sciences, and especially in economics, a lot to contribute. And one way we contribute in science as researchers is what Levin and colleagues called forward reasoning, determining the ways in which our actions, and of course the actions of others, contribute to make some potential futures real, but not others. But we should not forget the unintended consequences. So I challenge the young researchers here to work in that direction of pattern recognition. How do we get to a more sustainable future? But it is not enough to work as researchers. I think we also need to consider our roles in teaching and outreach. And that is also very important, especially for the next generation, because we have a lot to contribute in educating those other people, in educating the disadvantaged people. When we think about what are the internal and external circumstances that we want, how do we make the future we want happen? We need that diversity. We need those multiple stakeholders. But we need to help educate those stakeholders so they can articulate themselves and have their voices heard. Because only then, if we have a diversity of voices heard and included in that, will we find the paths that get us off the 7 degrees more by the end of the century. Will we find the voices that help us find better ways to be considered as alternatives, as a society as a whole? So that's my appeal to you today. Thank you.